This is episode 28 of Ice Ice Beta, a podcast about ice climbing mixed and, especially this summer, dry tooling. And I'm your host, Aaron Gary. Corey Buhay has made a life out of doing what she loves. That's not to say it's been easy, even if she has made it look that way from the outside. Known as the go-to reporter for all things dry tooling, Corey quickly built a career as a freelance journalist, regularly contributing to Climbing, Backpacker, Smithsonian, and the like. Around the time she started writing full-time, she also started dry tooling. And again, similar to her freelance career, she quickly established herself, rising to the top of the rankings for comp ice climbing in North America. But shortly thereafter, she decided to walk away. How come? In today's chat, we talk about the assignment that changed everything and going all in on things that give you happiness, struggles with expectations, perfectionism, and anxiety, and how that eventually led to burnout, and how taking a break has led to rediscovering a sense of grounding and a joy in climbing again. I want to say that I really appreciated Corey's openness and willingness to discuss difficult topics. And also, I really appreciated her ability to infuse humor into the conversation. Further, if you're struggling with mental health, know that you're not alone and there are lots of folks and resources who can help, some of which we share in the show notes. We'll get to the conversation shortly, but first, a quick message from our sponsors. Gloves are essential for winter climbing, and with Anew, you're in good hands. As a boutique climbing brand, they only care about making the best ice climbing and dry tooling gloves around. There are no shareholders to report to. They earn their keep with an uncompromising pursuit of durable, dexterous, and waterproof. That's because it's part of the heart and soul of the company. It starts with decades of establishing first ascents on ice and mixed lines, combines generational glove-making know-how, and is topped off by a belief in sustainability. The result is ultimate care for the craft of climbing and design. To learn more, check out their gloves and story at anew.com. That is ANIIU.com.
We get it. For us, ice season never really ends. It just kind of blends between rock, plastic, and plywood until waterfalls freeze again. No matter how you climb in the off-season, Furnace Industries keeps you going till your next bout of screaming barfies. With their gym-safe dry ice evolutions, you can keep up your fitness indoors. And if you're looking to challenge yourself on your home wall, they have the largest variety of dry tooling holds in America. Check out their full lineup of ice and dry tooling gear at furnace-industries.com. Because for us, it's always ice season.
You've got this really interesting position as like the dry tooling reporter. And I'm wondering, what is it like to be the go-to reporter for the sport?
It's pretty fun. It's a very, very tiny niche. I would like there to be more dry tooling writers, but it seems like there's only room for one because only 6 people are reading these stories, it seems like.
I'm one of them.
Thank you. I really love it because I'm really passionate about the community. I love, as a writer, characters and interesting narratives and underdog stories and stories about crazy places and crazy settings, and dry tooling kind of has all of that. So for me, it's been really fun to A, write about my friends, and B, write about all these things that fascinate me. And I think it's been really nice for my, I don't know, just maybe career growth as a writer too, because I think it's really easy to kind of get pigeonholed into a topic or start doing a lot of commercial work and feel a little burnt out. It just feels like the daily grind. But when someone is willing to like pay you, sometimes it's just like pennies to write something that you just really, really want to write about. They're like, sure, whatever, Corey, if you really want to write this, we'll let you. But that, I think, keeps the fire for the reporting and the journalism going, just from, a career perspective. And then also anything I can do to shed light on the sport and give it the love it deserves is, keeps me going. So yeah, it's been fun. I really love it.
I learned about dry tooling through your writing before I ever dry tooled. So that was an interesting dynamic for me. I was like, oh, there's this really weird esoteric sport that happens in like Russia and Switzerland and all these other places. And like, it just looks cool, but wow, never heard of it. Weird.
What story? Do you remember?
It was the one about your time in Russia, where you were staying with Pavel with like 18 other people, and like great. I mean, it must have been a feature story. It was really, really comprehensive and just involved. And I was like, wow, this is like the old reporting in Rock and Ice where people would go to, one of the stands and, it was like uncovering this whole new world. Really liked it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Matt Samet edited that story. I think he took a big chance on it because I was like, okay, I think the working title for that was Police Academy Borscht, because we had gone to this police academy, we were having this comp, and, we're just like sitting with all these 15-year-old like military cadets and then also the greatest ice climbers on earth. And we're just sitting at these long cafeteria tables while these kind of deadpanned, like gruff-faced Russian women were just like slopping borscht on a plate. I was like, this is the most surreal experience I've ever had. And so Matt was like, do you have any travel stories? And I was like, well, I had this weird experience in Russia one time. It's like, okay, I'll give you a couple thousand words. I'm trusting you to do something worthwhile with this. And I think that was one of the cases where, an editor takes a chance on you and you're like, oh shit, this has got to be really good. So you work really hard on it and it comes out. So that was, I think a team effort for sure. But he did a great job editing that.
He was fun to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with him on a few articles. One was about, the last one was supposed to be in climbing's last issue, and then it got pushed to gym climbing, and then ended up in neither and ended up online. But it was about the history of Quincy Quarries, which is like this ex-urban outdoor climbing area that's like covered in graffiti outside of Boston. Really fun to go into. If you like graffiti on rock, it's a really pretty place. It's got a lot of history. But he's just such a easy way of like crafting sentences that I could never comprehend. I would just be talking to them. You just like spit out a revised sentence. I was like, oh, yeah, that's way better. Thank you.
Better, yeah. He's been in the game for so long, and I think at some point you just turn on writer brain and it comes out in your speech. And I think he's got, a really strong natural talent and way with words. And it's just been around for so long that that level of experience is hard to ignore. But yeah, I really like working with Matt. I think he's super down to earth, super talented. There are some editors that, they send you some edits. And you're like, well, I didn't like that as much as my original, but I guess sure, fine. And then there's editors like Matt who they turn your work back and you're like, wow, that's way better than I ever imagined. And I think you rewrote half of it, and I can't even tell what I wrote and what you wrote because it's just so seamless. I've always been told that that's the mark as a good editor. They change your work, but you're not sure what was changed. And I think he has a really good way of just kind of like stepping into the voice of whatever he's working on or whose ever work he's working on and finding a way to make it better without like overstepping or overshadowing, which is a very, as an editor, as a past editor, I know that's a very delicate art, and he does a great job.
When I started getting into freelance writing, you were actually one of the writers that I came across pretty early on. And I was looking at your body work and I was like, whoa, that's what I want to be doing. Because you were writing for climbing and backpacking and outside at the time. Your stories tend to be first person narrative. And so like you're living a really interesting life and writing incredibly well. And I was like, ooh, I wonder, like, how do I get there? There were a handful of other writers too. But that stood with me, and you've stuck with it because I actually bowed out a couple of years ago. COVID was rough, and you've managed to, as far as I can tell, continue to do this as a career. Maybe you can just take us back to the beginning, and I'm going to ask a really basic question: did you always want to be a writer?
Yes, but I never intended to become a journalist. I started writing when I was really young, and I wrote novels, really bad fantasy novels, dragons and wizards and gnomes and, cool. All that kind of stuff. And so I think I wrote my first book when I was like 11. It was like 100 pages, and then, wrote 3 or 4 others over the years. And so I was always kind of dead set on being a novelist, and I still write some fiction just for fun. But I sort of fell into writing as a career. I put the writing aside in high school, was studying chemistry in college when I first went to college. I ended up dropping out halfway through college. I had a lot of family stuff, a lot of mental health stuff, dropped out, went back and was like, I will do anything to finish. I'll get any degree to finish. Just get me out of here. So, dropped the chemistry thing because that was super stressful. And started doing environmental science and got involved in the outdoors club, and they had a blog and they needed somebody to write for the blog. So I was like, I can spell, let me at it. So, and I had just so much fun with it. And I think that came out in the writing. And I had a friend who was editing the college newspaper, and he said, well, we like your blog. Do you want to write an outdoors column for our college newspaper? And it's like, oh, sure. So I started doing that. and people seemed to enjoy that. And I ended up getting an internship at Backpacker Magazine, mainly because I was trying to find a way to get myself to Colorado to climb more. And it's like, oh, well, this magazine will let me write for them. I'm okay. I can spell, kind of the same thing. Like, I got the basics. I could probably make this work. And it was just so fun. And just the energy of working at a magazine is incredible. And the energy that's in a room when you have a bunch of creative people bouncing ideas off of each other, putting together an issue, whether it's art or story or, just like basic layout, like there's just such a vibrancy to it that I hadn't experienced before. So I really fell in love with that process, but decided like, I got to use my degree, which is environmental science. So I got a job doing botany for the city of Boulder. And I had been studying salamanders in North Carolina before that. And while I was doing all of that, I was like, tromping around catching salamanders during the day and then writing at night or pitching at night. And then I was worked at Trader Joe's, and I was taking interviews in the back room during my 30-minute lunch break, and then writing in the middle of the night, and then taking interviews under a tree when I worked for the city of Boulder, and writing in the truck on the back of a napkin on the way home, just kind of hustling.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I think it was really stressful and really exhausting, and I wasn't sleeping at all, but I was just so psyched to write as much as possible. I don't even think I had an end game. I don't think it was even I am going to be a full-time freelance writer. It was just someone's going to pay me money to call somebody and ask them stupid questions and then, tinker around with some words. That sounds great. And so I just kind of did it for the love of it until it was well, I'm spending more time writing than I am mapping plants. Maybe I should just make that my thing.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I kind of came at it a different way. I was very intentional about wanting to becoming a writer, and the grind, I went in knowing the grind was going to be part of it. It was, it's like the price you pay, if you're going to do this, you have to be willing to put the time and energy in. And for you, you just kind of happened. not to discount your energy, but not the energy that you put towards it, but it was more of it was fun and enlivening and just a happenstance almost.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the way I tend to be as a person. I'm pretty internally driven, and if I apply external goals or benchmarks that I'm trying to hit for myself, I just get so stressed out about, I think that's when all the perfectionism kicks in, and I get really stressed about I'm so behind, I'm not going to make this goal by this time. And I just sort of spin my wheels and freeze up and nothing gets done. And I think I've faced a lot of that with climbing and competition anxiety and performance anxiety in climbing. I've got to send this by this date, or I've got to, do this to keep up, or I've got this trip coming up I've got to be in shape for. And that it turns it into work, and it makes it really stressful. And kind of the only way I get anything done is to just focus on okay, I'm doing this for the joy of it, and I'm going to put the stress aside, and I'm just going to keep a really narrow focus one day at a time, one word at a time. And as long as I do that, then that internal drive will keep me going. And I think naturally a really hard worker. And as long as I can keep that at a healthy level and not get into perfectionism anxiety mode, then it's good. It comes across, I think, as I just fell into it. I just did one thing to another. But I think it's really intentional, focusing on the joy and staying really present and keeping my demons on a tight leash.
I'm curious because you've described yourself when you were younger as, I'm going to quote you here, a raging ball of anxiety, which sounds intense. And to put it lightly. And you're talking about how it's been a lot of management and grappling with it and sort of figuring out how to work with it and keeping it on a tight leash, as you put it. How have you worked with and through your anxiety from both maybe we can start with your professional career, and then maybe we could talk about climbing too, because I imagine they parallel.
It's been a multi-year process. It's, as anyone will tell you, there's no quick fix when it comes to working on yourself, I guess. I think the anxiety was really bad in college. I think that was kind of where it hit its peak. And I consider myself lucky to have hit rock bottom really early in life, because when you're 19, you still have a lot of time for course correction. Whereas I know friends who are 37, 38 and are now just wait, I don't have to be perfect all the time. Wait, my worth isn't dependent on my job performance. It's oh, honey, you just spent a lot of years, thinking up the wrong tree. So I feel lucky to have, had that experience where I just kind of stressed myself into a hole and had to drop out of college. And as I mentioned before, I was having eating disorder trouble, and my dad was really sick, and I was just couldn't manage my expectations for grades in school. And so I dropped out of school. I took a year off and just worked. I worked mainly with dogs. I worked at a doggy daycare, which was awesome. And I started rethinking my approach to a lot of things, from, religion. I was raised really Catholic, to just kind of the way I approached grades, the way I approach, what is success to me? Is success having really good grades, having an illustrious career, having a high salary, and just not being able to sleep at night, not being able to get out of bed in the morning, because that was the life I was living? Or is success being kind of mediocre at a lot of things, but having friends I love and having time to love them back? And I settled on the latter. I chose a major that I felt was less prestigious, but that was going to be interesting to me and entertaining, and kind of just like trusted the rest to take care of itself. That's something maybe I credit to my parents. My dad particularly always said, do what you love and the rest would follow. He was always a lot like me in that, just very naturally driven. And if he did something he was passionate about, he would work hard at it and learn a lot and find a way to make it work. And I think he knew that I was probably the same way. And so I, finally took his advice after years of ignoring it and was like, okay, I'm going to do what I love and let the rest follow, and make sure that I'm prioritizing in life the things that matter. And I think that shift in perspective, along with some therapy and getting to know myself better and surrounding myself with friends I could actually talk to about things when I was spinning out, all made a big difference. And then also like 10 years of practicing that, which is the hard part. And I think all of those skills came into writing in my career in a really useful way. I don't know if I would be able to be a freelance writer had I not done a lot to get to know myself and work on that anxiety and that confidence. Because so much of writing is you put your heart and your soul into a piece, and then you give it to an editor and you let them shred it to bits, and then it comes back to you, and you've got to remember, oh, that's the writing that needed work. It's not me that needed the work. It's the writing that was wrong. It's not me that's wrong. And that is really hard to do, especially when you're a young writer, and especially when you are pouring your heart and soul into everything. I think these days I'm really good at separating the writing I do for myself, that's just for me, that's just for fun, to like try to do something artsy and new and that my soul is in, and the writing that's business. And that's just a product that I'm making. And if the editor wants to turn it on its head, spelling up everything backwards, that's fine. That's the product they're paying for, and I'm happy to do it, And so that is a really hard switch to flip. But yeah, kind of focusing on the goals and the values and what matters to you and what is success, and like kind of really keeping that in focus, I think has been really useful both in my personal life and in my career.
When I was growing up, I always had this like vague idea of success, and was a perfectionist when I was younger, very much not so now. But, I can't really identify where it came from, because it did cause a lot of internal conflict as well. And the thing is, I feel like so much of being a kid is just, you don't know anything else. And so there's just this like blueprint that you kind of find yourself in, and you just figure that that's just how it is. And you don't get to see the schematics. And it's only when you get into a different environment are you able to sort of like reflect on like where you came from. Where do you think this sense of perfectionism and what success looked like, where was it coming from for you?
I think it was probably just the factor of how I was raised and where I was raised. I grew up in a pretty, I would say, well-off area of North Atlanta. So, all the kids I hung out with, their parents were doctors and lawyers and CEOs and CFOs.
Samesies.
Yeah. And I think when you're a kid, you're like a little sponge and you just absorb things without realizing it. And even if your parents were really good about saying like, you can do whatever you want, you're great just the way you are, I think your little kid sponge self is picking up the message around you, which is like, oh, we respect so-and-so's dad because he's a doctor and he makes $1 million a year. And, oh, like we look down on so-and-so's parents because they lost their job or their dad's managing McDonald's. And I think, just the way people kind of like gossip or give sideways glances, I think you pick up on that as a kid without knowing. And I think just the place I was raised was just like a very high achieving place. I went to Catholic school because that was important to my parents, so that's a private school. And so you have a lot of high achieving kids and teachers who want you to go to the Ivy League and things like that. And so I think you just kind of pick up on that and you end up from a really young age, like, oh, I have to achieve or I'm going to let everyone else down.
I remember getting picked up from sleepovers sometimes, and there would be, God, this is going to make me sound really privileged, which I guess I was. But, there would be a mansion and be like Mercedes and Jaguars in the front. And then my dad would show up. My dad was a doctor, and he would show up in like a Saab, and I'd be like kind of almost embarrassed.
Well, yeah, yeah, which is funny. And it's funny because like no one taught you to feel that way. You just somehow picked up on some kind of subtle cue in your environment, which is really interesting. And I don't know, like, my parents definitely didn't grow up super wealthy. And I think, they worked really hard and did really well for themselves. And I think tried really hard to instill in me and my brother those same values. And so like, I have, no blame or no beef with them, but I think some of it might just be inherited pathology. I think my mom can have perfectionist tendencies. I think maybe my dad did in some respects. I think there's some anxiety that runs in my family and some depression that runs in my family. And so I think some of that's probably genetic too. I feel like I could play this game all day, like trying to retroactively piece together the puzzle. But what matters now is like, well, my brain's not working in these areas. So what can we do now?
Yeah, there's so much of like trying to understand who you are, and it works to an extent, but then it's not necessarily actionable, I guess you gotta choose how you relate to it and move forward.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like things go wrong and you're like, well, it doesn't matter who forgot to take the knot out of the end of the rope. We are where we are now. What can we do?
Speaking of climbing, because this is a podcast about dry tooling and mixed climbing and ice climbing. You are the beat writer for comp dry tooling, among many other beats. How did you get into dry tooling?
I was a journalist when I was just starting out, and I was based in Colorado. And one of my editors said like, oh, hey, we got a tip from a PR guy down in Durango. There's going to be some kind of competition down there. We'll pay for your hotel if you want to go down there and cover it. I was like, yeah, sick.
Sweet.
Someone's going to pay for my gas. I get to go somewhere. So I went down there and I did a little research like, okay, UIA Ice Climbing World Cup. I was like, cool, there's going to be a lot of ice. I've been ice climbing. I know exactly what this is going to look like. And then I showed up, and it was this huge monster of a plywood tower erected in the parking lot of Ska Brewing. And Ska Brewing is this like crazy punk rock kind of brewery. There's half naked skeleton ladies painted on the wall, and there was like a skeleton upstairs with a sign that said like athletes this way. I was like, this is a crazy place for like a world-class competition. And then the climbing started, and they had suspended 2 giant plywood cubes from a crane over the competition structure. So you would climb the competition structure and then hop on these swinging boxes. It was like, this is like American Ninja Warrior meets Frogger meets all the video games they've ever played, and there's no ice, and there's all these Russians walking around. The whole Korean team was there, and Pavel was there setting, and Masato I think was either maybe setting or there to coach Emer, and it was just like, it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. I was like, is this a sport? Is this normal? Are they supposed to be doing this? Was there supposed to be ice? And so just started asking questions and meeting people. One of the athletes was like, well, do you want to try? Like, I can take you out the next day. There's a crag near here. I was like, yes. So I went with him and did some dry tooling, and I fell in a creek, I think, because I couldn't pull onto the wall. And it was great. I had so much fun. It's like, all right, let's keep doing this. And just kind of kept meeting friends who were in those circles, and, hang out with enough people who are willing to take you out to the Vail Amphitheater, and you end up dry tooling at a decent level at some point. So I just kind of stuck with it. And then there was just some little competitions in Colorado that the friends kind of heckled me into joining, and one thing turned into the next.
That's crazy. I didn't realize it was from an assignment.
Yeah.
That is one of the like coolest aspects about being a journalist is, one, you get to ask anybody anything, and they're like very excited to talk to about it for whatever reason. And then two is that you get to learn about all these different subjects which you normally wouldn't encounter. And I mean, this changed so much direction in your life. It's wild.
Yeah. Shortly after that assignment, I ended up for a lot of like cascading events. I met a partner that I was with for like the next 6 years. I became like a pretty prominent climbing writer for, a period of time. I feel like I do a little bit less pure climbing writing now than maybe I used to, but that like sort of launched my career in a different direction in a new way. I started competing internationally. Like I moved into my car shortly after that. Like it changed the course of my life in ways that I could never have expected, just because someone was like, hey, do you want to go write this story? So that's kind of wild to think about.
For the listener and the timeline of your life. So this is a World Cup in Durango.
Mhm.
What year was that?
I think that was early 2017, maybe January 2017 that happened.
Okay, and then the following year was Denver.
hmm I think Denver was February of 2019, so it was the
Oh, okay.
2018-2019 season. hmm
And you ended up doing quite well at that Denver competition, no?
Actually, that's untrue. I did really poorly in Denver.
My
I
mistake.
I did really well.
I didn't research that part. Sorry.
I think I came in second to last for women, which was really interesting because originally I had come in last and I was really broken up about it. I trained so hard. I was so new. Like I should have had no expectations. It was like the best people in the world. The American team was quite bad and I should have had no expectations, but I went in thinking like I'm going to do at least okay. And then I came in last. I think I was sitting on a bench beyond the competition structure after qualifiers was over crying because I was so upset. And my friend Angela came over and she's like, "You didn't come in last." I was like, "What?" She said, "They miscalculated the results." And I felt this like soaring sense of relief. And then she goes, "They miscalculated results. I came in last." And then I was like so upset for Angela and so guilty about this soaring sense of relief. Because like obviously
Yeah.
if you're not coming last, it means somebody else did. And that made me really think about like, my approach to competition is a little bit messed up here. So that was an interesting learning moment. And then yeah, she and I went to become good friends and training partners and root for each other really hard now, which is nice.
Okay. Well, let's unpack that a bit because for a few years you ended up being, what many would consider, well, standings would say you were like the top female in North America. But apparently you didn't start that way. You weren't right off the bat.
No.
You did have a pretty accelerated career, and
Mhm.
maybe can you just maybe walk through how you progressed and when did you hit that inflection point where things really started to click for you?
So the first year, we just really had no tools to train at all. No equipment, no space. We would go into the spot bouldering gym here in Boulder and hang up a 2x4 upstairs, which they would let us do. And we would just hang on our tools for 4 minutes at a time and take turns doing that. And that's really all we had to do to train.
That was pre the tread wall with dry tooling holds on it.
Yeah. And they let us do that. And then I think shortly after, they let us put dry tooling holds on the tread wall, which the tread wall was not meant to do. It was like these old wooden boards that would creak anytime you cranked on them. And also dry tooling, your wingspan is so huge that we were like, your feet were at the bottom of the tread wall and your tools were at the top of the tread wall. And you were just sort of shuffling in space to try to keep the thing from stopping
Like
on
crab
you.
walk up the.
Yeah. It was not good training, but we found it very entertaining. It's all we had, so we were stoked. So we had the tread wall, we had this 2x4 that we were just like doing dead hangs on for ridiculously long periods of time. So I got really strong, but I still had no idea what I was doing. And so I probably did that for about a year or two. And then the ice coop opened up. And that is the little ice climbing gym and training facility in Boulder that I still volunteer at and coach at sometimes. I think that is when it really clicked because that is when we finally had holds to train on. We had real competition holds. We had plywood to kick into. The space was really, really tiny then, and it's still pretty tiny, and you can't really move upward at all. You're really only just traversing, but anything was useful. And I think when we had that space, that made a huge difference because we finally had a gathering place for people in the community to come. And that meant I had other women to train with and, other guys as well, but other people to come in and say like, "Oh, what if you tried it this way? Do you want to try this route? I'm trying this route." And we finally had people to like kind of egg each other on. And that I think is when things really started to accelerating. That was really motivating for me. And I learned a lot just by other people telling me what I was doing wrong and by watching other people climb too. So finally having a space to do that, I think really kickstarted things. And I was really stoked. I was hanging out with my friends. I was climbing at a pretty high level. I was really stoked on some outdoor projects. And I think that's when things really, really got going.
What was the community like then? Like who was around? Like who are you climbing with? Things like that. Because Boulder probably has one of the highest concentrations of dry toolers in the world at this point. But I mean, even today at its like apex, there's what, like 35 dry toolers in the area. So I can only imagine what it was like back then.
It was pretty small. We had a good number of the kids from Durango that Marcus had trained. Marcus Garcia had that youth team, and quite a few of them were either based here or came here for college. So Liam Foster, Tyler Kempney, Tomas Gerline. We had Angela Tomchik, who doesn't compete anymore, but she still lives around and climbs around. Lindsay Hastings. And then we had Lauren Chartel, who's done some amazing first female ascents in Vail. She would come down. She's based in Rifle. Ryan Vachon, who's a total badass. He would come down every now and again to train with us. Wes Fowler, who did one of the, I think, first American ascents of Saphira. So we had like some really strong folks on that team, but it was maybe like 12 of us, 20 of us on a good day. And then COVID happened, and there was like 6 people in the gym every single day. None of us had anything else to do. So we would just climb together. So honestly, that was probably the best thing for my dry tooling. I was like doing pull-ups in a tree outside because the gym was closed. And then the ice coop opened, and I was just like kind of doing pull-ups and dicking around in there. And that was pretty good for training, having nothing better to do but train.
I mean, basically, this is the time when like Team USA really started to pick up again, no? Because I don't have my exact time frame correct, but I was talking with Kevin Lindlau, and he was saying that the first year he competed, there was like basically the whole roster, and then like the following year, like after that season, everyone retired. It was just like him. And so I don't know if you know on the timeline, but like where does that place things in Team USA? Were you like sort of the part of the influx of members at this stage? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I think, Kevin and maybe Kendra were sort of holding down the fort for Team USA by themselves for a long time. And then when Denver hosted the World Cup, I think Kendra put in a lot of effort to standardize the system of, who gets to be on the team and are there tryouts and can this be a real thing? And I think she really professionalized it. And also reached out to a lot of women specifically to get interested, there had never been a ton of women competing for Team USA before. I think I benefited from that. I filled out an actual application to be on the team, which I don't know if she had to do in quite such a standardized way in the past. Probably around 2018 is when Kendra and I think her brother Carter at the time, they were like, all right, we're going to have a team. Here's the system. Here's how you sign up. And you're, really made that happen. So I think that I was part of that wave, like, okay, like this is a real team. This is a real thing. They need more people. It's coming to Denver, which I think was a real turning point for a lot of people. Like, oh, that's really exciting. The World Cup is coming and I could be involved. So I think all of those stars aligned and I was kind of part of that gang who jumped on the bandwagon at the same time.
It seems like an inflection point for participation for women in the sport as well. And it seems like you mentioned that you're part of that wave. From that perspective, were you seeing parity at that time as far as participation? Like what was the scene like among women dry-toolers?
When I first started, there was only a handful of us. There was definitely not parity in participation. Later we started having team tryouts. And then before that we had that just like kind of an application you'd fill out. The sense was that, if you were a woman and could fill a jersey and you filled out the application, you'd be on the team. And the men had a really hard time. A lot of them felt, I think, really competitive with each other and were training really, really hard to try to get on this team. And the women just didn't have that experience. In fact, my partner at the time was like, gosh, I wish I was a woman. It would be so easy to get on the team, which I found very offensive because we've got, plenty of else working against us that I don't think he was taking into account when he made that comment. But, I could sort of understand that. And so, there's only a handful of us. And I think we felt a lot of pressure to perform well. I think a lot of us, didn't consider ourselves competitive athletes before we started doing the Team USA dry tooling. And at that point, I think we felt a lot of pressure to perform really well. I think we felt like we were watched or that we were like representing women in some bigger way than maybe we were. And it felt really intense and really competitive, I think mostly among us. I would love to sugarcoat things and say like, girl power all the way, women supporting women, always. Team USA has always been that way. And I think it's very much that way now. I think we've got a really strong core group of women who are really pushing each other and really love each other and care about each other and want to see each other succeed. And that's been really, really beautiful to see. But in the beginning, I don't think it was like that. I think we felt really competitive amongst each other. And I could give you a lot of theories for that, but I think it was just growing pains. And so, there weren't a lot of women in the sport. The women who were in the sport didn't always get along. And I think it took a lot of time and intention to change that. And now all the women I climb with and dry tool with are really tight and really supportive. And I think they're really driving the sport forward in a really beautiful way. And that's been absolutely awesome to see.
I'm always interested in like how culture develops, because you basically, when something's so new, you imprint upon it. It tends to be sort of top down, right? It's kind of like who's the loudest voice or who's like the one in charge. I'm wondering if maybe you had to sort of dissect where that feeling of competition was coming from and where that culture was being developed from.
I think part of it was just the thing that happens with women when we're used to being the only girl in the room, which is that, that becomes part of your identity. Like, oh, like I'm the most badass chick here. And often it's maybe because you're the only badass chick here. I think our society often pits women against women in a way that is really unhealthy for everybody. So I don't think that's anybody's fault. I think that's just the culture we grew up in. And I think a lot of that was at play when all of a sudden, a lot of us women who are, used to climbing with only male partners or used to being, like the strongest woman at the crag or the only one with the crag, and, that comes with a little bit of a status and a little bit of identity that I think we put more stock in than we should or intend to even. I think a lot of that's subconscious. And I think when you put a lot of people in the room who are used to having maybe that ego, you get a lot of strong personalities pushing against each other. So I think that's part of it. And I think we all had to learn like, okay, like, A, I'm not the only woman in the space, and B, I don't want to be the only woman in the space. I want more of us, and I need to reconcile those two things. And so I think that took some internal work, certainly for myself. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I suspect for some other folks too. And then I also think that the way our application process was for the team originally, it was based on your rankings the previous year. So if you outranked all the other girls, then you'd get a sure spot on the team the next year. So I think there was a sense that like, okay, I need to beat all these other women if I want to do this again. So we were looking at each other as competition rather than looking at, the Russian team or the Korean team or the Swiss team as competition, which is what we're supposed to be doing on a team. But I think climbing is a really individual sport, and none of us were used to thinking that way. And so I think it just took some doing for us to talk that out and think that through and all get on the same page.
So there was a concerted effort because, I guess jumping to today, it's from the outside perspective, it seems like on the whole, you're all very friendly and supportive and a jolly fun team, but it seems like you're very close.
Yeah, I think we for sure are now. And I think that is also like sort of across genders for the team. I can't speak to like what things felt like within the men's team, but from what I've seen over the years is we've all gotten closer. And so usually like we have co-ed practices, we all train together, we all climb together, we're all good friends. I think we've all grown together. It's been really nice. And I think a lot of that culture, I think it's very easy to trace that back to Tyler Kempney. I think he was really intentional about, I want this sport to remain fun and goofy, and I don't want any of these people to take themselves too seriously. And it's too small of a sport for there to be infighting. So anytime people were having, a spat with each other at the ice coop, he was pretty good about like going to each party and saying like, what is the deal? You guys need to sit down, talk this through. We will not have fighting at the ice coop. And I think he was really intentional about keeping cliques from developing really early on, which is really hard to do. At times felt a little micromanagey, like, God, like, why can't Tyler mind his own business? But he had a vision for the kind of community he wanted. And I think ultimately the community we have now is that. And we've had some fits and starts and, it's sort of changed ownership and it's a nonprofit now and we've got a board. And I think the changes in leadership always come with some ups and downs. But lately it's felt like the good old days, just like a really tight community. Everyone is psyched for your climb, whether it's your first day or your 100th day. And it's incredibly, incredibly welcoming and doesn't feel overly competitive or overly serious, which is, I think, hard to find in climbing gyms these days. And for a place where like Team USA is training and people are like training for international competitions and some of the biggest objectives in North America, for it to just be like a fun, goofy community clubhouse is, I think we really treasure that.
That's what really solidified dry tooling for me. I was only in Boulder for like, not this past winter, but the winter before. I remember walking in, I'd only tried dry tooling in a gym like 2 weeks prior in Tom Burney's gym in Seattle. Nice. And he was like the first guy to put tools in my hand. It was awesome. It was great.
I love that.
But then I showed up to the ice coop, and I walked in. Everyone was like really friendly. And they're like, what do you like? Welcome, showing me around, yada, yada, yada. And like immediately had a climbing partner for that week and et cetera, et cetera. And it was that environment's not typical. I would say in most in most places, you don't just show up and just like feel at ease and make friends. Well, maybe it's just me.
Well, it's me too. I feel like most climbing gyms I go to, and I've been climbing forever, and I'll go into a bouldering gym and be like, oh, everyone's really good, and their shirts are off, and they're like broing around. I'm just gonna stay in this corner,
it's a lot of grunting.
And the ice scoop, yeah, and the ice scoop, we've got a shirts policy, no broing out. You have to say nice things to people. I think we're very intentional about that, and it comes from within the community. Everyone who's there wants everyone to have a good time and wants everyone to feel like loved and taken care of and stoked. So it's just really nice and different, for sure different.
So going back to your own career, you're progressing and the team dynamic is shifting and you guys are getting more serious. And you ended up doing quite well. You ended up multiple time winner of the Uray ice competition. And maybe you can go into the specifics of sort of how you performed at the World Cups. And then something happened where you decided to walk away from the sport and the competitions. And what happened there?
I think probably, I think the simple answer is burnout. We talked a little bit earlier about perfectionism and this underlying story of anxiety that I've had on and off through my life. I'd like to say I'm pretty good at managing it in most respects, but maybe that's the clinical answer. But I think the human answer is that after doing really well, really fast, got really good really fast, after that, I felt like I was in the spotlight. I felt like I was being watched. I felt like the expectation to continue along this trajectory was there. And I had this deep fear that I wouldn't be able to keep up. I wouldn't be able to meet expectations. It was sort of like, okay, like I succeeded in my goal. Like I was first in North America on the World Cup series that year. I won Uray, which was the biggest competition in my mind, in my heart, even if it's not the biggest in the world. And, I think one of the most prestigious drytooling competitions and longest running, certainly North America. So that was a really big deal for me. And so I'd won that. And it was sort of like, well, where now? Like, do I just grit my teeth and try to maintain this forever? That feels really daunting. Like, do I crash and burn? That feels like failure. That feels really scary. Or do I push harder? And, I'd already sacrificed so much in my life. I think my relationship was suffering at that time. I was living in a van, which I liked doing, but it can be limiting in some respects. All my spare time was training. Like I had some friendships that I was not able to maintain because I was training all the time. It's like, what else can I cut? What else can I give up in my life to maintain this? So I just felt really trapped. My life can only get worse from here, basically. And I really struggled with that pressure, which I think was all internal. I think my teammates would have loved me even if I had crashed and burned. It was all I could do to get to the start line at every competition that year. Go back to the van and cry until it was my turn to climb. I just had a really hard time dealing with that pressure and dealing with this sense of loneliness and dealing with this sense of expectation and just wasn't able to cope with it. So after that last Uray competition, that was in 2022, I think, got second place and then kind of like fucked off and went to a beach in Mexico with some friends and just sat in the sand with a beer in my hand for 2 weeks and stared into the void and was like, what now? And then decided to shift things. And so, I moved to London for 9 months and I traveled and I didn't climb and decided to explore the other areas of my life that I'd been putting on hold for the last, 3, 4, 5 years to compete. Learned how to dance and kind of doubled down on my career more and spent time with old friends that I just hadn't made time for. And it doesn't sound revolutionary to say this, but for me and for a lot of other people, it does. So, there's more to life than climbing. And I had to forcefully make myself remember that. Now my relationship with climbing and with competition is a lot healthier than it used to be. But it was a process.
Were you talking to anyone about this, how you were feeling during that season leading up to the World Cup scene and things like that? I mean, it's a lot to hold in.
Yeah, I had a therapist at the time, which was awesome. I managed to find a therapist who's a pretty high caliber climber, which was great. Or maybe not high caliber, but like does it a lot. She's a long time climber. I had a therapist before that where I'd be like, oh yeah, I was 20 feet above this tipped out cam and I was like starting to have this performance anxiety, like what if I don't send this through? And she's like, of course you were scared. You were really high off the ground. It's just natural. And I was like, you don't get it. And also I have to explain what that climbing means every time I go to therapy. Yeah. And so between that and dry tooling being, just a lot to explain to anybody, it's like, I need I need a therapist who knows about climbing, because all my problems seem to be climbing related. And that was just because my whole life was climbing. So anything I did was climbing related. So, started seeing a therapist who is just like, well, I also lived in my van with a boyfriend for a year in the desert. And so I know exactly what that is like. It's like, oh, what therapist can respond with, such perfect resignation? So she was great. So I was talking to a therapist, was also talking to my partner at the time about some of this. And I think a few of my teammates, but I felt such a sense of shame about what I was feeling. Oh, I'm not a real athlete if I can't hang for more than a season, or I'm not a real athlete if I can't cope with these feelings of expectation, or I'm not a real athlete if I don't want it anymore. And I felt like I was letting everyone down because I felt like so many people had invested so much in me. Tyler had invested so much time and so much coaching. I had so many friends be there for me, through this whole process and train with me and encourage me. And I felt like if I chose to step away, I'd be letting them all down. So I didn't feel like I could talk to any of my teammates about it. But after I took that time off, I had a lot of people come up to me who were on the team, people I felt I couldn't talk to about these sorts of things. And they'd said, like, I burnt out at the same time. I also could barely get myself to that competition. I also felt this extreme weight of pressure and expectation. I also felt like my life got smaller when I devoted all of my time to climbing. And I think that sort of opened the door for a lot of us to have a lot of these conversations at the same time. And there were quite a few of my teammates who took a year off or took a season off. And I think we've all been able to work together to open up about these things and get back into training or climbing in a way that just feels like fun and easy and not like work and not like a have to, but like a want to. I think that's made the team a lot stronger and the community a lot stronger to just all have been through this at the same time and be brave enough to talk about it.
I'm interested in the psychology of organizations, sort of how culture continues to exist. Because if you want to maintain a certain identity, it takes a lot of effort, and certain tendencies tend to proliferate, whether it's intentional or not, sort of standards that sort of get adhered to. It sounds like you, in the environment that you were in, where you had burnout, there was a certain feeling amongst the team that maybe there was not spoken about, but it kind of existed because it seemed like a lot of people experienced the same thing. But there's a new generation coming in, right? And you actually wrote an article recently where you interviewed Kat Shirley, and you were talking about how you sort of played a mentor role for her, and she's just had tremendous growth. And I'm wondering if, as part of this leadership team, are you guys thinking about having these types of conversations and being more open with each other and sort of applying some of the lessons learned from that experience?
That's a really good question. And I don't do a ton of team coaching. I'll do one-off things, or I'll teach clinics and stuff, but I don't coach the team. And so that would probably be a good question for our team coaches at the Ice Coop. But I do think that a lot of these lessons are really baked in now, especially because Kat is doing a lot of coaching, and because a lot of the other folks who are coaching right now have either benefited from Marcus's wisdom, and Marcus has a really beautiful outlook on what is success and what matters, and kind of focusing on growing as a person before growing as a climber. And I think Kat has benefited a lot from that mentorship over the years, and now she's taking charge. And so I am confident that she'll pass that on to anyone who comes into contact with her. And I think a lot of our other coaches have been in the Ice Coop long enough to see these fits and starts. And so I think a lot of us are really good about, if somebody comes off the wall, did you have fun? Are you being nice to yourself? Rather than oh, sucks, man, could have done better, which is, I think, how it is a lot of the time in climbing, heartbreaker, dude. And that's kind of it. Instead, now it's did you have fun? Did you enjoy that route? You had great try hard. That's all that matters. Do you want to go get beers after? And that aspect of the culture is getting passed along, even if we don't have necessarily a strong framework for preventing burnout, which maybe we should, and maybe we will at some point. But I think just the fact that it's a small sport and we've all grown and we've all watched each other grown, I think that's really deeply embedded into the way that new folks are coming into the Ice Coop. And if we have a youth team, I would like to see that maybe more deeply entrenched or more structured. But right now I'm seeing it getting passed along pretty organically, that kind of mindset.
Do you think that a team psychologist should be mandatory?
I think that would be really cool. the Ice Coop team and even like, USA climbing team are really small, and we cannot afford a team psychologist, but there's just like not a lot of money in a really small sport. I think something like, USA or IFSC, like sport climbing, I think those teams for sure, especially because there's so many young kids who have started competing at a young age, and that's their whole identity. I think with the Ice Cube, a lot of us had life before dry tooling, or, Team USA, a lot of us had a life before dry tooling and have other jobs and other identities and families and partnerships outside of it. And I think that keeps us all a little bit more grounded. But I think on a team where climbing is your whole identity, I think having a team psychologist should totally be mandatory. Because I think I've seen a lot of people's lives get turned upside down by competition climbing or high level climbing in a way that is really heartbreaking. And this is not just in ice climbing or dry tooling, but I've had friends who are climbers. Climbing has been their whole life, and I don't think anyone ever sat them down and had the climbing isn't everything conversation with them early enough. Like, I just know people who've climbed and climbed hard and made it their whole life because they felt like they had to belong, not because they necessarily wanted to deep down. And it's hard because climbing is so fun and so many people love it so much, but I think it's easy to get just like swept up in that tornado of have to, especially if you live somewhere like Boulder, Colorado.
I'm wondering, what were you up to in London, and what was the process like of processing the past few competition seasons?
So I, work remotely as a writer, so just continued working full time while I was there. Kind of the process was to get back in touch with my body and my brain, which maybe sounds a little bit cheesy, but I had spent so much time just like, you're not allowed to feel this. You're not allowed to be tired of this. You're not allowed to not want to train today. You're not allowed to eat cookies or cake whenever you feel like it because you're an athlete. And so a lot of that was kind of rewiring really rigorous standards I was holding myself to. And so what that looked like, and also, I have mentioned this before, but like had a long history of eating disorders, and that last competition season really brought those out in full force. So a lot of what rewiring this and getting back in touch with my natural intuition around food and exercise and movement and climbing, it looks like sometimes I would go to the store and I would want a cookie and I would get a whole box of cookies and just eat cookies for dinner. And I would do that for days at a time. Or sometimes it meant I would just gonna lie in my bed and not exercise and watch movies for days at a time and just wait for the natural, like, oh my God, I'm stir crazy. I'm gonna go run just because I want to. I'm gonna go lift weights just because I want to. I'm gonna climb because climbing sounds fun today. So it took a lot of just sitting around and waiting for the natural stoke to reappear. I know other climbers who've done this with, they get burnt out on sport climbing or something. They're like, all right, I'm just going to do easy stuff. I'm just going to go to the gym and stretch until that stoke reappears. And for me, that was a long, painful process because sitting still is hard. So it was a lot of that. I did a lot of just like HIIT workouts and just ran around the marsh near my house and played with my roommate's dog and just kind of like goofed off and didn't think about climbing and didn't think about movement as training, but just as like, I'm going to go play outside. I just really needed that reset. That was really big for me. And just like let myself gain some weight and that be fine. Let myself remember that gaining weight is never as scary as you think it is. And getting out of shape is never as scary as you think it is. And that life can be bigger and richer and better, even if you're a little heavier, can do a few less pull-ups, That was really important for me. And that's what that looked like. And then I just started climbing at the gym and made some friends. And then I had a friend who was going to CU's for the summer and was like, do you want to tag along? You can play, you can climb, you cannot climb. You can get high and look for frogs, or you can pick a project. Like, I don't really care. And I was like, cool, I'll do that. So I just lived in a tent in the woods and climbed sometimes and got high and looked for frogs other times and just like did whatever felt good and remembered why I love climbing, which is that the community is great, playing outside is great, trying hard sometimes is great, and just like goofing around on top rope is great, and that really brought me back to the beginning and why I started climbing and why I fell in love with climbing. And I just really needed to do a total reset.
It strikes me as, just really challenging because
it was hard. It was really fun.
I've never trained or been at a high competition athlete, so it's, take it with a grain of salt. But I feel like part of becoming the best you can be is like pushing yourself. And so like knowing like what that balance is, I'm wondering if you if it's too early to sort of like try to find that balance, right? Because pushing too much leads to burnout or leads to like a deadness to like your physical capabilities or what have you.
Yeah. I think the trick is that there is a balance between ignore the, oh, I don't want to get out of bed this morning feeling and go to the gym anyway. Sometimes it is important to do that for your mental health, if for no other reason. And the like, I really don't want to be here today. This is making me anxious and miserable. And I should really just go home and lay on the couch rather than like force another set. And I think finding that balance point is difficult. And I think it also is constantly changing. You know, there are periods in my life or seasons where I really want to push it. I really want to go hard. I really want to ignore pain. And that is bringing me joy and fulfillment. And there are periods where I really need to listen to my body and eat a whole cake some days and, eat, whatever the heck I want, whenever I want. And that's going to make me healthiest and happiness. And I think the trick is not, I think people want to say like, all right, I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to find that balance point. I'm going to make myself a really rigorous schedule where I stick to this exact balance point forever and then I'm fixed. And I think the answer is getting to know yourself really well and constantly asking like, what is good today? What is good today? What is good today? Like, do I need a rest today? How is my body this week? And all that checking in with yourself is exhausting and nobody wants to do it. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of like concerted and consistent effort because that balance point is always changing. It's really hard because it's just very nuanced and very subtle. And in my experience, having done that work and taken that time and been able to like get to know myself better has been infinitely worth it. Like my life and my relationship to climbing and my relationship to food is so much better than I ever thought it was even possible to be. And a year ago, I would have told you that, once you have an eating disorder, you always have an eating disorder. Once you're like a competitive type A climbing freak, you're always that way. And now I feel very much not that way. And I never thought that would be possible for me.
This will be you just came out of your first season back, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How are you feeling about this year and, what's next for you?
I'm hoping to try out for the US team this year, which surprised me. I just did local competitions last year and that was it was really fun. And I felt like I was able to approach competitions without any expectations or attachment to the result. I just wanted to hang out with my friends and the dugout is the most convenient place to heckle the people you're climbing with. So that's really the place to be. So signed up competitions mainly for that reason and just had a blast. I just had so much fun. They went okay, but mostly I just had a really good time. And I want to do more of that. Like I want to travel with my friends and see the international community that we all love so much and be a part of it all and push myself some. So if I could scoot onto the team in last place and stay in last place all season, I would be very happy. So the plan going forward is to do the minimum amount to get by, which is, I think, hard for me and hard for a lot of people who are climbers, but I think is important to keep an eye on sometimes. Anyway, I'm hoping to compete. I'm feeling a lot better about my relationship to competing and my relationship to climbing. Hoping to like maybe find some little baby projects either in Rocky or in Vail this year and just like get back into climbing in whatever way feels like fun and just follow the stoke. So that's kind of the plan. With career, I'll keep writing about climbing, keep writing about mountaineering, keep writing about all my friends just because I just love it. So
makes it easy when they're all doing cool shit.
I know, right? Yeah. So yeah, just kind of keep it on.
If you were to give your younger self one piece of beta, could be for life, could be for climbing, could be for anything, what would that be?
I think I would probably just echo my dad, do what you love and the rest will follow. And I think also none of it matters. Your grades don't matter. What grade you climb doesn't matter. Your salary doesn't really matter as long as you can, buy yourself the food you like to eat and keep a roof over your head. Like prestige doesn't matter. We're all just like little specks floating around space on a rock. And if it makes you happy, do it. And if it doesn't make you happy, drop it. Like I've got a friend who says like, if it's not a fuck yes, it's a fuck no. And so I wish I had taken more of that approach earlier rather than I have to do this to be worth something. I have to do this if anyone's going to take me seriously. And that's, of course, easier said than done. It's hard to drop all that by the wayside.
If listeners want to be able to support you or the Ice Coop, yeah, do you want to just share like how can people do that?
Yeah, so if you're ever in Boulder, Colorado, definitely stop by. The Ice Coop is the only ice climbing training facility of its kind in North America. It's also a nonprofit, and we do a ton of cool stuff. We do a lot of community events. We have queer nights every month. We have beginners nights every month, ladies nights. We partner with local groups like Women's Wilderness and Crexing in Color, which are all really badass nonprofits who are doing amazing things for women in sport and queer folks in sport, and just making ice climbing dry tooling feel cozy and fun and welcoming for people who aren't historically or haven't historically felt welcomed in these kinds of spaces. So we're a little nonprofit. We're all volunteer run. I volunteer there. So if you're ever around, stop by. We also do take donations. So if you ever want to check us out online, we should have that donations page up soon. So anyway, yeah, anything you do, just support us or spread the word. Come by, grab a sticker, tell other folks about it. It's all helps.
They're fun stickers. Definitely do that if you can. And if we can get the number of visitors to Corey's dry tooling articles on climbing.com to more than 5, then it'll show the editors and the algorithm that people want to see this so we can get more content online.
More fun stories about ice climbing. Always a win.
If you'd like to follow Corey's latest writings, her website is coreybuhay.com. That is CoreyBuhay.com. And you'll definitely want to check out her climbing.com pieces because we want to show them that, hey, there's an audience for this type of stuff. We want more pieces, more dry tooling content, please. And the way to do that is to go check them out at climbing.com. Some of my personal favorite articles of Corey's are listed in the show notes. These include Russia's World Cup ice climbing scene is as hardcore as it gets, and The Strange Underworld of Competition Ice Climbing. Both great reads. As always, thanks to Hannah Noel for providing the intro music and Andrew Solomon for editing. Thanks for listening. See you all next week.